It was a few winters ago. My divorce had been finalized 6 months prior, and I was in desperate need of a reset. Christina, my girlfriend at the time, suggested we escape somewhere quiet, somewhere far from the chaos that had swallowed my life. We found a rental cabin tucked beside a frozen lake in upstate New York. It was surrounded by thick woods, isolated and mostly untouched. I booked it without hesitation. The place was perfect. A modern yet cozy house perched on the lakeshore, with only a few other properties sparsely scattered in the distance, most of them vacant for the season. That was exactly what I wanted, distance from civilization. The host wasn't there, but he left detailed instructions, keys hidden under a rock, thermostat settings, all the usual Airbnb stuff. When we arrived early that morning, a small package sat waiting on the front steps. There was no return address, just a handwritten note. Enjoy your stay. Make sure to stay warm. A cute gesture, we thought. But inside the package was nothing more than a tiny box of matches. We laughed it off. Christina made a joke about how people upstate were always a little odd. Then we forgot about it. The first 2 days were perfect. Long hikes through the snow-covered woods, mugs of hot cocoa by the fire, and a kind of silence that felt almost sacred. The snow never stopped falling. It wasn't a blizzard. There was no wind or fog. But it was heavy enough to blanket everything in stillness, like the world itself had paused. The master bedroom was upstairs, facing the lake. Massive windows let us fall asleep beneath a soft cascade of snow and stars. A skylight overhead framed the sky so perfectly it felt unreal. At night, we could hear the snowflakes tapping gently on the glass above, nature's lullaby. Then came the third night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I thought it was the wind. But then I realized something else was out there. A faint noise, unnatural, mechanical, something that didn't belong. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake Christina. I crossed the room and peered out the window, and there it was, a snowmobile. It crawled across the frozen lake slowly, almost nervously, its headlights flickering like it wasn't sure the ice would hold. The snowfall was heavier now, visibility low, but I could still make out the shape. The driver stopped. They dismounted and began waving, frantic and desperate, shouting something I couldn't hear, but they were facing our house. Were they calling to us? Did they know we were here? I woke Christina, told her someone was out there. I quickly layered up, rushed downstairs, and stepped onto the deck. The cold hit me like a wall of knives, and then I saw her. It was a woman. She was yelling, sobbing, "Thank God, someone's there!" Over and over. She said she'd lost her little boy in the storm, that he was out there, somewhere in the snow. She was panicked, hysterical. Her voice cracked with terror, and it wasn't a question of whether I would help. There was a child out there, alone, in this. I laced my boots, told Christina to stay inside, and stepped off the deck toward the lake. As I drew closer, her figure became clearer, wrapped in heavy winter gear. But there was something off, something I couldn't quite place. She was wrapped in a heavy fur coat, her hair pulled tightly back into a braid. The ice beneath us was solid, no cracks, no danger of falling through. For a moment I relaxed. If her child had run out onto the lake, they'd be safe from drowning at least. But then she spoke again. She said the boy had run away from home. That stopped me in my tracks. Something about it didn't add up. I expected her to say the boy had fallen from the snowmobile, that she hadn't noticed in the chaos of the storm. But now my mind started picking at the logic of it all. How could you not notice your own child fall off a snowmobile? My gut twisted. The panic I felt earlier was beginning to shift into something else. Doubt. I was about to question her, ask for more details, when she looked at me and said something that made my blood run cold. "Do you still have those matches?" She smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was deliberate, knowing. And that's when everything clicked. The package, the note, the matches. She had left them, not the host. Before I could say a word, she reached into her coat and pulled out a gun. Her tone shifted from fragile mother to cold predator. She demanded my phone and wallet. I didn't hesitate. I handed them over. There was no time to think, no room to act. The whole encounter lasted less than half a minute. Without another word, she turned, climbed back onto the snowmobile, and vanished into the whiteout like a ghost swallowed by the storm. I snapped out of my shock and ran, slipping, stumbling toward the house, screaming for Christina to call the police. She already had. By the time I got back inside, we locked every door and window. I couldn't stop pacing, still shaking, still expecting that snowmobile to return, to circle us like a wolf just outside the tree line. An hour later, the cops arrived. But the snow, so beautiful just days ago, had already erased every trace she left behind. Christina was in tears. I was furious. We had come here for peace. The police tried to reassure us. They found an old boat ramp on the far end of the lake, their best guess being that's how she'd gotten onto the ice. They searched, but there was nothing left to find. The snow had buried it all. I pushed them to keep looking. I demanded they search harder, but they told me the truth I already knew. There wasn't much they could do. We tried tracking my phone, but it was already offline. The only silver lining? The host refunded everything. He sounded genuinely shocked on the phone, claimed he had no idea about any package. He even said he'd never sent a welcome note. But something felt off. How did that woman know we'd be there? How did she know about the matches? Why go through all that for a wallet and a phone? Unless that wasn't the point. I couldn't shake the feeling that the host was involved. I mentioned it to Airbnb, but got nowhere. Just scripted apologies and empty reassurances. And here's the part that still eats at me. For a long time after, I wondered if my ex-wife had something to do with it. The thought alone makes me sick. But she always had a vindictive streak. I could almost picture her smirking, watching it unfold. Even now, I can't explain what happened. None of it makes sense. Not the planning, not the execution, not the timing. Unless she wasn't after things. Unless it was about the fear. Maybe she was just broken. Someone who found a twisted kind of joy in terror. Whatever the case, I never found answers. Just snow. As the years passed, we started storing some of my grandparents' old furniture up in the attic. Well, the smaller pieces anyway. The bigger items didn't fit, but my parents couldn't bear to part with what remained of Nana and Pop. That attic slowly turned into a museum of memories. Porcelain figures, embroidered pillows, brittle photo albums with curling edges. It felt bittersweet, like laying our childhood to rest one box at a time. Looking back, that was the turning point, when summer trips became rare and the lake house started to feel like a relic instead of a retreat. Between my studies and my parents' work schedules, we were lucky to get even a week together out there. Still, my parents refused to rent it out. Too many heirlooms, too many memories. They didn't want strangers cracking the glass on something irreplaceable. Eventually, though, practicality won out. A few years back, they met a local, an elderly veteran who had taken up antique restoration after retirement. My dad admired that. The man had white, wiry hair, a strange, twisted beard, and a voice that grated like gravel in a blender. He was small, hunched, with a limp and a face that looked half melted, like something went wrong and never healed right. We all found him off-putting, but my dad saw a kindred spirit, another man who'd served, who'd seen things we couldn't understand. He signed a year-long lease with him, confident that someone who valued antiques wouldn't wreck the place. I remember my dad saying, "You don't know what it's like to risk your life for your country. Guys like him deserve a break." We didn't have a say. My sister and I were disappointed we wouldn't be able to visit that summer, but the money helped cover our college expenses. And the man, despite being unsettling, seemed harmless enough. At first, my parents still kept a distant eye on him, mostly through check-ins with the landscapers, who doubled as informal lookouts. They'd tell my mom if anything seemed off, and eventually, something did. The calls started coming. The landscapers told my mom they'd seen him sitting out on the porch, unmoving, watching the neighbors' kids by the lake for hours. Not just once, regularly. And they hinted, carefully, hesitantly, that they'd caught him doing other things too, things they didn't want to say over the phone. My mom snapped. She'd always been compassionate, but the idea of that man lurking at her family's sanctuary, eyeing children, made her sick. She fought with my dad for weeks, accused him of being blind, of prioritizing respect over responsibility. I remember her shouting, "He gives me the creeps. What the hell were you thinking, letting him live in our house?" When the lease was finally up, my dad told the man he couldn't renew it, Said there was planned maintenance, something about plumbing, electricity. A lie, but one that worked. The man left without protest. We even paid the landscapers extra to help him move out quickly. My mom didn't want him there for one more day. Honestly, neither did I. Even before the landscapers' warnings, I'd felt uneasy. There was just something off about that guy. Something not quite human. The idea that he'd had access to every inch of that house, our childhood memories, our grandparents' keepsakes, still turns my stomach. After he left, we thought it was over, but it wasn't. About a year later, my sister graduated college, and my parents decided to celebrate the milestone with one last summer trip to the lake house. They cashed in their sick days, booked the flights, and dragged us all back for a family reunion, one that none of us realized would be our last. By then, they'd gotten a black lab mix named Bear. My sister hadn't met him yet, so she was especially excited. Bear was big, friendly, and still had that clumsy puppy energy despite his size. He made the house feel alive again. We arrived just as the sun was starting to dip below the tree line. Golden light spilled across the front porch like melted honey. It almost felt normal. Since the place was still empty of groceries, we left Bear inside and headed into town for dinner. Quick trip, maybe an hour or two tops. But the second we stepped back inside, everything changed. The air was heavy. Still, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. And then I saw him, Bear, sprawled out at the base of the stairs, his dark fur glistening with blood under the hallway light. He was panting hard, legs twitching. My sister screamed so loud it made my skin crawl. My mom reached for her phone immediately, hands shaking. My dad didn't say a word. He just walked to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I followed. We didn't know if someone was still inside. We moved room by room, clearing corners, calling out nothing, until we reached the second floor. That's when my dad stopped dead in his tracks. He raised his hand to silence me and pointed up. The attic hatch was open, just slightly, but enough that you could see a faint beam of light trembling through the crack. My stomach dropped. Before I could react, my dad pulled the hatch open and climbed the ladder. No hesitation. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I just stood there, gripping the handle of a knife I didn't know how to use, waiting to hear something. But there was no fight, no noise, just silence. A few seconds later, my dad came back down. His face was pale but calm. He leaned in and whispered, "It's him." The old tenant. I couldn't believe it. That man, he had been living in our attic. My mom appeared seconds later. When she realized what was happening, she completely lost it. Screaming, shouting, asking how this could happen. My dad didn't have an answer. The police arrived not long after. They found the man hunched in a far corner of the attic, barely conscious. His skin was paper thin and clammy, his breath shallow. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. They carried him down the ladder, and then they found our house key in his pocket. My mom lost it again, furious, shaking, demanding answers. My dad had promised her the locks had been changed after the lease ended. Clearly, he hadn't. Despite everything, the blood, the invasion, the betrayal, my dad refused to press charges. Not even after learning that the man had stabbed our dog. That decision nearly destroyed their marriage. Bear pulled through somehow. The vet said it was a miracle, but nothing else felt like it survived that summer. We haven't been back to the lake house since. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to. It's strange how a place can go from sacred to haunted. All it takes is one person, one night, one crack in the ceiling and everything spills through. Most of the houses around the lake sat dark. Fancy, massive places that people barely used. Summer homes for people too busy to enjoy them. Kind of a waste, honestly. But for us, it had its perks. No neighbors meant no noise complaints, so when James threw parties out there, they were legendary. Not this time, though. It was just the two of us. Low-key night. I had just gotten out of a 3-year relationship, and I needed to get my head straight, drink a few beers, talk trash, forget the world. We were out on the dock when I noticed it. A flicker, just a brief glint of light across the lake. I thought it was sunlight bouncing off a window or something, but it kept happening, on and off, in a rhythm. I pointed it out to James, and we both just stood there watching. And then we realized it wasn't random. 3 short flashes, 3 long, 3 short again. I was confused. James wasn't. "That's Morse code," he said. I looked at him like he'd grown another head. "Since when do you know Morse code?" "I don't," he replied, "but everyone knows SOS." I didn't believe him at first, so I Googled it. He was right. I don't know why, but something about seeing it confirmed on my screen made it all feel real. We kept staring at that house. The light kept flashing the same way for maybe another minute before stopping completely. "What if someone's actually in trouble?" James asked. I wanted to agree, but I was on thin ice, underage, had a pending DUI. I couldn't risk calling the cops unless we were 100% sure. James didn't like it, but I told him we should check it out first. If it was serious, then we'd call. So we went back inside, grabbed a couple of knives from James's brother's weird stash of switchblades, just in case, and decided to head across the lake. We couldn't drive for obvious reasons, so we dragged his dad's kayak down to the water and pushed off. At first it felt fun, like we were in some horror movie, but with beers and bravado. We were laughing, joking, but the closer we got to the other side, the quieter it got. That part of the lake was darker, quieter. The house we were heading toward looked massive from a distance, but up close it was falling apart. The dock was literally sinking into the water. No more flashing light, no sign of anyone. We couldn't tie off the kayak like we'd planned, so we pulled it up onto the rocky bank. Everything felt sharper now, cold, real. I could feel the adrenaline starting to kick in. We scanned the house. The light had come from the second floor. That much we were sure of. James was already backing out. "Dude, let's just go. This is sketch. We'll kayak back and call it in." "There's no cell service out here," I reminded him. "We'd need to connect to Wi-Fi. You really want to paddle back across the lake in the dark just to find out someone's maybe bleeding to death in that house?" He didn't say anything. Because the truth was, we were already too deep in to back out. I know how stupid this sounds. Everyone I've told says the same thing, and they're not wrong. But if you knew me or James, you'd know we've never been poster children for good decision-making. We didn't go to the front door. That would have been suicide. Instead, we crept around the side of the house until we found a window that was already unlocked. I don't know if that made it better or worse. Inside, the place was empty. Not like nobody's home empty, like never lived in empty. No furniture, no decorations. Not even dust-covered junk left behind. Just stripped walls and bare floors, like someone had erased any trace of humanity from the place. We moved room to room, slow and quiet, eventually finding the staircase. I kept track of the window where the light had come from, and we followed the layout until we got to what we figured was the room. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. James looked at me, nodded. I opened the door. The room was empty, except for one thing. An old projector sat by the window, pointed out at the lake. It hit me all at once. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a lure, a trap. And the moment I realized that, I heard James bolt behind me. No whispered warnings, no stealth, just full-on sprinting. I turned and ran, my pulse screaming. Halfway down the stairs, I heard it, a door upstairs swinging open, hard, then footsteps, heavy, fast. We hit the bottom of the stairs. James dove through the window first, and I wasn't far behind. As I climbed through, I heard the footsteps behind me hit the first floor. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see. I just ran. James was already at the lake's edge, but something was wrong. He turned, panic on his face. The kayak's gone. Before I could even react, we saw him. A man sprinting from the side of the house. Big, fast, too fast. I couldn't make out a face, just that he was closing the gap like it was nothing. I pulled the switchblade from my pocket, ready for whatever was coming. But James didn't stop. He didn't even hesitate. He jumped straight into the water, sneakers, hoodie, everything. I didn't think. I followed. The water was freezing. It hit me like 1,000 knives, but I swam anyway, arms burning, legs shaking. We aimed for the lights of James's house, but they looked like they were miles away. It felt endless. But somehow, we made it. We pulled ourselves up onto the dock like drowned rats. I don't think I've ever been that cold. We ran inside, locked every door, and finally called the cops. Took them almost an hour to get there. When they finally showed up, they headed across the lake to check it out. They were gone for a while, and when they came back, they told us what I'd expected and dreaded. There was no one there. No footprints, no gear, no clothes, no signs of recent use. Just an abandoned house, empty, stripped, dead silent. They weren't exactly thrilled with us. Gave us the whole "why didn't you call sooner" speech. James's parents were livid, threatening to sue the town for letting something like that happen and blaming the police for not digging deeper. But no one ever did. Nothing ever came of it. And I still don't know who or what was in that house. I don't know what would have happened if we'd stayed 5 seconds longer. Most people I talk to think the same thing. It was a trap. Someone had planned something. Maybe they bailed. Maybe we scared them off. But sometimes, when it's late and I'm alone, I wonder if they didn't bail. I wonder if we just got lucky.